Hello, my name is Michael, and I obsess. I come across something that grabs me and I consume until I can't take anymore, and then I'm on to the next. Some obsessions last a week, others a lifetime. It is my intention to explore these obsessions with you as they occur while the passion is hot. Welcome to Eclectic Obsessions. In 1995, I was working as a barista in a coffee house when I heard music that froze me to the spot. I had never experienced anything like it before and was instantly amazed. I asked who had played it, what it was, and why they had kept it from me until now. After work, I went to the store, purchased the disc, and played it over and over. We will be exploring the music of Stereolab on this episode of Eclectic Obsessions. Stereolab were an English-French avant-pop band formed in London in 1990. Led by the songwriting team of Tim Gain and Laetitia Sadier, the group's music combined influences from krautrock, lounge, and 1960s pop music, often incorporating a repetitive motoric beat with heavy use of vintage electronic keyboards and female vocals sung in English and French. The band also drew from funk, jazz, and Brazilian music, and were one of the first artists to be dubbed post-rock. They are regarded among the most innovative and influential groups of the 1990s. Stereolab was formed by Tim Gain on guitar and keyboards and Laetitia Sadier on vocals, keyboards, and guitar after the breakup of McCarthy. The two were romantically involved for several years and were the group's only consistent members. Drawing from surrealist and situationist movements, their songs were politically and philosophically charged, leading some critics to describe the group as Marxist, an accusation that Gain and Sadier denied. On stage, the band played in a more feedback-driven and guitar-oriented style. Other longtime members included 1992 edition Mary Hansen on backing vocals, keyboards, and guitar, who remained in the lineup until her accidental death in 2002. And 1993 edition Andy Ramsey on drums, who is still with the band as of 2009. The High Llamas leader Sean O'Hagan on guitar and keyboards was also a member from 1993 to 1994, and continued appearing on later records for occasional guest appearances. Although Stereolab found success in the underground music scene and were influential enough to spark a renewed interest in older analog instruments, they never had a significant commercial impact. The band were released from their recording contract with Elektra Records due to poor record sales. Since then, their self-owned label Duophonic has signed a distribution deal with Too Pure. In 2009, Stereolab announced via their website that they were on indefinite hiatus. They are scheduled to reunite for live performances in 2019. Stereolab's music combines a droning rock sound with lounge instrumentals, overlaid with sing-song female vocals and pop melodies. It has been generally described as avant-pop, indie pop, art pop, indie electronic, indie rock, post-rock, experimental rock, and experimental pop. Their records are heavily influenced by the motoric technique of 1970s krautrock groups such as Neu! And Faust. Tim Gain has supported the comparison. Neu! Did minimalism and drones, but in a very pop way. The track Diagonals from Dots and Loops in 1997 samples a drum beat from I Can't Wait by the krautrock commune Amandul. Funk, jazz, and Brazilian music were additional inspirations. Emperor Tomato Ketchup in 1996 forayed into funk and experimental stylings, while Dots and Loops leaned toward jazz with bossa nova and 60s pop incorporations. The sounds influenced by minimalist composers Philip Glass and Steve Reich can be found on the 1999 album Cobra and Phases group Play Voltage in the Milky Night. Regarding their later works such as Instant O in the Universe in 2003 and Margarine Eclipse in 2004, critics have compared the releases to their earlier guitar-driven style. Stereolab's style also incorporates easy-listening music of the 1950s and 60s. Joshua Klein in Washington Post said that years before everyone else caught on, Stereolab was referencing 1970s German bands Can and Neu, the Mexican lounge music master Esquivel, and the decidedly unhip Burt Bacharach. Stereolab make use of vintage electronic keyboards and synthesizers from brands such as Farfisa, Vox, and Moog. Gain has praised the instruments for their versatility. We use the older effects because they're more direct, more extreme, and they're more like plasticine. You can shape them into loads of things. The 1994 album Mars Zodiac Quintet prominently features Moog synthesizers. Laetitia Sadier's English and French vocals was a part of Stereolab's music since the beginning and would occasionally sing wordlessly along with the music. In reference to her laid-back delivery, Peter Shapiro wrote facetiously in Wire that Sadier displayed all the emotional histrionics of Nico, while some critics have commented that her vocals were unintelligible. Sadier would often trade vocals with Mary Hansen back and forth in a sing-song manner that has been described as eerie and hypnotic, as well as sweet and slightly alien. After Hansen's death in 2002, critic Jim Harrington commented that her absence is noticeable on live performances of Stereolab's older tracks, and that their newer songs could have benefited from Hansen's backing vocals. In interviews, Gain and Sadier have discussed their musical philosophy. Gain said that to be unique was more important than to be good. On the subject of being too obscure, he said in a 1996 interview that maybe the area where we're on dodgy ground is this idea that you need great knowledge of esoteric music to understand what we're doing. Sadier responded to Gain saying that she thinks we have achieved a music that will make sense to a lot of people whether they know about Steve Reich or not. The duo were upfront about their desire to grow their sound. For Gain, otherwise it just sounds like what other people are doing. And for Sadier, you trust that there is more and that it can be done more interesting. Stereolab's music is politically and philosophically charged. Dave Heaton of Pop Matters said that the group uses lyrics to convey ideas while using them for the pleasurable way the words sound. Laetitia Sadier, who writes the group's lyrics, was strongly influenced by the situationist philosophy Society of the Spectacle by Marxist theorist Guy Debord. Her more recent inspiration was her anger towards the Iraq War. The surrealist as well as the situationist cultural and political movements were also influences, as stated by Sadier and Gain in a 1999 Salon interview. Basically, I want to change the world. I want to make people think about how they live every day, shake them a bit. Stereolab's album and song titles occasionally reference avant-garde political groups and artists. Gain said that the title of their 1999 album, Cobra and Phases Group Play Voltage in the Milky Night, contains the name of two surrealist organizations, Cobra and Phases Group. The title of the song Brockage from Dots and Loops in 1997 is a nod to experimental filmmaker Stan Brockage. Other examples are the 1992 compilation Switched On, named after Wendy Carlos's 1968 album Switched On Bach, and the 1993 song Jenny Ondio Line, an interlock of inventor Georges Jenny and his instrument the Ondio Line. Stereolab have been called one of the most influential and fiercely independent and original groups of the 90s by writers Stephen Thomas Erlewine and Pierre Perron respectively, as well as one of the decade's most innovative British bands by Mark Jenkins. Simon Reynolds commented in Rolling Stone that the group's earlier records form an endlessly seductive body of work that sounds always the same, always different. In a review for the 1992 single John Cage Bubblegum, Jason Anarchy said that no other artist of its generation fused the high-minded daring of the avant-garde and the lowbrow infectiousness of pop with as much innovation, skill, and appeal. In The Wire, Peter Shapiro compared the band to Britpop bands Oasis and Blur and defended their music against the charge that it is nothing but the sum total of its arcane reference points. They were one of the first groups to be termed post-rock. In a 1996 article, journalist Angela Lewis applied the new term to Stereolab and three other bands who have connections to the group. Stylistically, music journalist J.D. Considine credits the band for anticipating and driving the late 1990s revival of vintage analog instruments among indie rock bands. The group have also received negative press. Barney Hoskins questioned the longevity of their music in a 1996 Mojo review, saying that their records sound more like arid experiments than music born of emotional need. In The Guardian, Dave Simpson stated, "With their borrowings from early obscure Kraftwerk and hip obtuse sources, Stereolab sound like a band of rock critics rather than musicians." Letitia Sadier's vocals were cited by author Stuart Shea as often being indecipherable. Stereolab alumni have also founded bands of their own. Guitarist Tim Gain founded the side project Cavern of Antimatter and also formed Turn On alongside band member Sean O'Hagan, who formed his own band The High Llamas. Catherine Gifford formed Snow Pony with former My Bloody Valentine bassist Debbie Good. Sadier has released 3 albums with her 4-piece side project Monade, whose sound Mark Jenkins called a little more Parisian than Stereolab's. Backing vocalist Mary Hansen formed a band named Schema with members of Hovercraft and released their eponymous EP in 2000. As of August 1999, U.S. album sales stood at 300,000 copies sold. Despite receiving critical acclaim and a sizable fan base, commercial success eluded the group. Early in their career, their 1993 EP Jenny on the Line entered the UK singles chart, but financial issues prevented the band from printing enough records to satisfy demand. When Elektra Records was closed down by Warner Brothers Records in 2004, Stereolab was dropped along with many other artists, reportedly because of poor sales. Since then, Stereolab's self-owned label Duophonic has inked a worldwide distribution deal with independent label Too Pure. Through Duophonic, the band both licenses their music and releases it directly, depending on geographic market. Gaines said, "We license our recordings and just give them to people. Then we don't have to ask for permission if we want to use it. We just want to be in control of our own music." Peng is Stereolab's debut studio album, released on May 26, 1992 in the United Kingdom by Too Pure and in the United States by American Recordings. The cover art and album title, a German onomatopoeia for a loud pop or bang, is derived from a cartoon called Der Todliche Finger that appeared in a 1970 issue of Hacha, a Swiss underground newspaper. Different panels of the same cartoon were adapted into cover art for other early Stereolab albums. They began to develop a unique approach to experimental pop music, building on the seriously playful mix of krautrock, dream pop, and lounge forged on the band's early singles. The album's first 3 tracks present the basic kinds of songs that the band would explore in the future. The tense, brooding Super Falling Star builds on simple keyboard drones and chilly choral vocals. Orgiastic is a prototypically chugging, droning guitar and keyboard workout, and the sweet bouncy melody and ba-ba-ba backing vocals of Peng 33 define Stereolab's early pop sound. Perversion mixes a heavy, dance-inspired beat with strummy Velvet Underground guitars and Beach Boys harmonies, while The Seeming and the Meaning and Stomach Worm are 2 of the band's most dynamic rock-oriented songs. Dreamy, melancholy songs like K-Stars and the fuzzed-out Mellotron and Envirez-vous represent respectively the soft and loud aspects of Stereolab's more experimental side, and Surreal Chemist manages to combine all of the aspects of the group's sound with overtly Marxist lyrics to boot. While Peng doesn't feature many of Stereolab's most instantly recognizable compositions, it defines the group's early style and reflects the eclectic directions pursued in later work. Stereolab incorporated easy listening elements into their sound with the EP Space Age Bachelor Pad Music released in March 1993. The work raised the band's profile and landed them a major label American record deal with Elektra Records. Their first album under Elektra, Transient Random Noise Bursts with Announcements, released in August of 1993, was an underground success in both the US and the UK. Mark Jenkins commented in the Washington Post that with the album, Stereolab continues the glorious drones of their indie work, giving celestial sweep to their garage rock organ pumping and rhythm guitar strumming. In the UK, the album was released on Duophonic ultra-high frequency discs, which is responsible for domestic releases of Stereolab's major albums. The majority of the first 1,500 vinyl copies were destroyed due to bad pressing quality. The third track, Pack Your Romantic Mind, was re-recorded because the song initially had a George Harrison sample the band was unable to receive permission to use. The end of the last track, Lock Groove Lullaby, extends into a lock groove repeating the phrase sampled from Perry and Kingsley's The Savers on their album Kaleidoscopic Vibrations, Spotlight on the Moog. The LP's sleeve design and liner notes were adapted from a hi-fi test record issued by Hi-Fi Sound magazine in 1969. The record itself is sampled in the track Jenny on the Line. Though it was the group's major label debut, Stereolab's Transient Random Noise Bursts with Announcements showed no signs of selling out. If anything, it is one of the most eclectic and experimental releases in Stereolab's early career, emphasizing the group's elongated krautrock jams, instrumentals, and harsh, noisy moments. The album begins and ends with smooth, sensual washes of sound like Tone Burst and Lock Groove Lullaby, and smoothly bouncy pop songs like I'm Going Out of My Way. These softer, more accessible moments surround complex and varied compositions such as Analog Rock, Our Trinitone Blast, and Golden Ball, which with its distorted vocals and shifting tempos serves as an appetizer for Jenny on the Line, a hypnotic 18-minute epic encompassing dreamy yet driving pop, a krautrock groove, forceful churning guitars, and a furious climax. It's the most ambitious and definitive moment of Stereolab's early years. But Transient Random Noise Bursts with Announcements also features quietly experimental pieces such as Pause, a slightly spooky song that uses distorted whispers as a rhythm track and places fluttery keyboards on Laetitia Sadier and Mary Hanson's sweet, slightly alien harmonies atop it. Likewise, the very sexy, very French Pack Your Romantic Mind reveals the growing influence of 50s and 60s easy listening on the group's musical direction. If switched on and penged to find the band's essential sound, Transient Random Noise Bursts with Announcements expanded it, reaffirming Stereolab's place as one of the most innovative and evolving groups of the 90s. In January 1994, Stereolab achieved their first chart entry when the 1993 EP Jenny on the Line entered at number 75 on the UK singles chart. Over the next 3 years, 4 more releases by the band would appear on this chart, ending with the EP Miss Modular in 1997. Their third album, Mars Zodiac Quintet, was released in August 1994. The album contains the single Ping Pong, which gained press coverage for its allegedly explicit Marxist lyrics. It was the last album to feature O'Hagan as a full-time member. He would continue to make guest appearances on later releases, while keyboardist Catherine Gifford was added. By the time of Mars Zodiac Quintet, Stereolab had already highlighted the rock and experimental sides of its music. Now the band concentrated on perfecting its space-age pop. Sweetly bouncy songs like Ping Pong and L'Enfer de Forme streamline the band's sound without sacrificing its essence. Track for track, this may be the group's most accessible, tightly written album. The groove-driven Outer Accelerator, Wow and Flutter, and Transona 5 reaffirm Stereolab's krautrock roots, but the band's sweet synth melodies and vocal arrangements give it a pop patina. Even extended pieces like Anamorphose and Nihilist Assault Group, which could have appeared on transient random noise bursts with announcements if they had a rawer production, are more sensual and voluptuous than edgy and challenging. It's equally apparent on layered complex songs such as New Orthophony and The Stars Are Destination, as well as spare minimal tracks like De Étoile Électronique, that the members of Stereolab focus their experimental energies on production tricks, vocal interplay, and increasingly electronic-based arrangements. The charming final track, Fiery Yellow, takes the band's fondness for lounge pop and experimentation to the limit. A delicate marimba-driven piece featuring the High Llamas Sean O'Hagan, it sounds like the kind of music Esquivel or Martin Denny would be proud to make in the 90s. While it's not as overtly innovative as some of Stereolab's earlier albums, Mars Zodiac Quintet is an enjoyable, accessible forerunner to the intricate, cerebral direction the group's music would take in the mid and late 90s. The group issued an EP titled Music for the Amorphous Body Study Center in April 1995. The EP was their musical contribution to an interactive art exhibit put on in collaboration with New York City artist Charles Long. Their second compilation of rarities, entitled Refried Ectoplasm Switched On Volume 2, was released in July of 1995. The band's fourth album, Emperor Tomato Ketchup, released in March of 1996, was a critical success and was played heavily on college radio. A record that captivated alternative rock, it represented the group's high water mark, said music journalists Tom Moon and Joshua Klein respectively. The album incorporated their early krautrock sound with hip-hop influences and experimental instrumental arrangements. Stéphane Davey of French newspaper Le Mans said that the album had musical influences such as the Velvet Underground, Burt Bacharach, and Francois Hardy. John McIntyre of Tortoise assisted with production and played on the album. Catherine Gifford was replaced by Morgane Lotte before recording, and bassist Duncan Brown by Richard Harrison after. The album takes its name from the 1971 Shuji Terayama directed Japanese film Tomato Ketchupu Kote. Two singles were released from Emperor Tomato Ketchup, Sybil's Reverie and Metronomic Underground. Emperor Tomato Ketchup was released to positive reception, becoming the band's most commercially and critically successful album to date. By August 1997, the album had sold over 46,000 units in the United States according to Nielsen SoundScan. Emperor Tomato Ketchup was ranked the 51st greatest album of the 1990s by Pitchfork and went on to appear in numerous other decade-end lists. The album was also included in the book 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. Stereolab was poised for a breakthrough release with Emperor Tomato Ketchup. Not only was their influence becoming apparent throughout alternative rock, but Mars Zodiac Quintet and Music for the Amorphous Body Study Center indicated that they were moving closer to distinct pop melodies. The group certainly hadn't backed away from pop melodies on Emperor Tomato Ketchup, but just as their hooks are becoming catchier, they bring in more avant-garde and experimental influences as well. Consequently, the album is Stereolab's most complex, multi-layered record. It lacks the raw, amateurish textures of their early singles, but the music is far more ambitious, melding electronic drones and sing-song melodies with string sections, slight hip-hop and dub influences, and scores of interweaving counter-melodies. Even when Stereolab appears to be creating a one-chord trance, there is a lot going on beneath the surface. Furthermore, the group's love for easy listening and pop melodies means that the music never feels cold or inaccessible. In fact, pop singles like Sybil's Reverie and The Noise of Carpet help ease listeners into the group's more experimental tendencies. Because of all its textures, Emperor Tomato Ketchup isn't as immediately accessible as Mars Zodiac Quintet, but it is a rich, rewarding listen. Released in September 1997, Dots and Loops was Stereolab's first album to enter the Billboard 200 charts, peaking at number 111. Barney Hoskins wrote in Rolling Stone that with the album, the group moved even further away from the one-chord Velvet's drone mesh of its early days towards easy listening and Europop. A review in German newspaper Die Zeit stated that in Dots and Loops, Stereolab transformed the harder Velvet Underground-like riffs of previous releases into softer sounds and noisy playfulness. Contributors to the album included John McEntire and Jan St. Werner of German electropop duo Mouse on Mars. By August 1999, the album had sold over 75,000 copies in the United States according to Nielsen SoundScan. The song Parsec was used for the launch of Volkswagen's new Beetle. Heavily influenced by bossa nova and swinging 60s pop, Dots and Loops is a deceptively light, breezy album that floats by with effortless grace. Even the segmented 20-minute refractions in the plastic pulse has a sunny, appealing surface. It is only upon later listens that the interlocking melodies and rhythms reveal their intricate interplay. In many ways, Dots and Loops is Stereolab's greatest musical accomplishment to date, demonstrating remarkable skill. Their interaction is closer to jazz than rock, exploring all of the possibilities of any melodic phrase. Their affection for 60s pop keeps Dots and Loops accessible, even though that doesn't mean it is as immediate as Emperor Tomato Ketchup. In fact, the laid-back stylings of Dots and Loops makes it a little difficult to assimilate upon first listen, but after a few repeated plays, its charms unfold as gracefully as any other Stereolab record. Stereolab's third compilation of rarities, Aluminum Tunes, was issued in October 1998. The group took a break from touring while Gain and Sadier had a child. Their sixth album, Cobra and Phase's group Play Voltage in the Milky Night, was released in September 1999, recorded with producer Jim O'Rourke and John McEntire. The album received mixed reviews for its lighter sound and peaked at number 154 on the Billboard 200. In a 1999 article in the Washington Post, Mark Jenkins asked Gain about the album's apparent lack of guitars. Gain responded, "There's a lot less upfront distorted guitar, but it's still quite guitar-based music. Every single track has guitar on it." Stereolab recruited a new bassist, Simon Johns, for their Cobra and Phases group tour. Stereolab took an unprecedented 2 years between 1997's Dots and Loops and 1999's Cobra and Phases group Play Voltage in the Milky Night as they tended to personal matters. All the usual Stereolab ingredients remain intact. The Baba lyrics, the Farfisa accents, the percolating analog synths, yet it exudes a jazzy vibe that deviates significantly from the group's motoric happy earlier albums. The group has absorbed McEntire's jazz fusion leanings. Fuses kicks off the album in compelling free jazz style, and the music continually bears O'Rourke's attention to detail. The first half of the album is filled with concise numbers that give way to the lengthy Blue Milk and Kaleidoscopic Gaze toward the end. After those two set pieces, it snaps back into succinct mode for the final 3 songs. Throughout it all, Stereolab's trademarks remain in place, but they're augmented by rhythms, harmonies, horn arrangements, dissonance, muted trumpets, and electric keyboards, all out of jazz from the late 1960s, whether it be bossa nova or fusion. All fascinating in theory and often in practice. Stereolab's 7th album, Sound Dust, released in August of 2001, rose to number 178 on the Billboard 200. The album also featured producers McEntire and O'Rourke. Sound Dust was more warmly received than Cobra and Phase's group Play Voltage in the Milky Night. Critic Joshua Klein said that the emphasis this time sounds less on unfocused experimentation and more on melody, a breezy and welcome return to form for the British band. Erlewine of AllMusic stated that the album finds the group deliberately recharging their creative juices, but he argued that Sound Dust was anchored in overly familiar territory. Upon its release, limited quantities of handmade book sleeves were released for both CD and LP formats, limited to 1,200 copies for each. It was Stereolab's last album to feature singer and guitar player Mary Hansen, who died in a biking accident the following year. While the 2 years between Dots and Loops and Cobra resulted in stagnation, the 2 years separating Cobra and Sound Dust find Stereolab delving deeper into avant-garde composition and 60s swing pop in equal measures. As the album opens with the minimal Black Ants and Sound Dust, it's evident that the group has restructured and pushed forward, even if it means that they're adhering to their time-honored tradition of expanding their trademark sound with new arrangements and influences. Then, Captain Easy Chord kicks in with a familiar, albeit catchy mid-tempo lounge groove and Laetitia Sadier's sing-song vocals, and the album is immediately anchored in familiar territory. In 2002, as they were planning their next album, Stereolab started building a studio north of Bordeaux, France. ABC Music, the Radio 1 sessions, was released in October. In the same year, Gain and Sadier's romantic relationship ended. On December 9, 2002, Mary Hansen was killed when hit by a truck while riding her bicycle. Writer Pierre Perron said that her playful nature and mischievous sense of humor came through in the way she approached the backing vocals she contributed to Stereolab, and the distinctive harmony she created with Sadier. For the next few months, Stereolab lay dormant as the members grieved. They eventually decided to continue. Future album and concert reviews would mention the effects of Hansen's absence. The EP Instant O in the Universe, released in October 2003, was recorded in France and was Stereolab's first release following Hansen's death. Music journalist Jim DeRogatis said that the EP marked a return to their earlier, harder sound, free from the pseudo-funk moves and avant-garde tinkering that had been inspired by Chicago producer Jim O'Rourke. Stereolab's eighth album, Margarine Eclipse, was released on January 27, 2004, with generally positive reviews and peaked at number 174 on the US Billboard 200. The track Feel and Triple was written in tribute to Hansen, Sadier said. I was reflecting on my years with her, reflecting on how we sometimes found it hard to express the love we had for one another, Sadier continued. Our dedication to her on the album says, "We will love you till the end, meaning of our lives." I'm not religious, but I feel Mary's energy is still around somewhere. It didn't just disappear. The Observer's Molly Woodcraft gave the album 4 out of 5 stars and commented that Sadier's vocal performance as life and love affirming, and the record as a whole as complex and catchy, bold and beatific. Khalifa Sana commented in Rolling Stone that Margarine Eclipse was full of familiar noises and melodies. Margarine Eclipse was Stereolab's last record to be released on American label Elektra Records, which shut down that same year. Future material would be released on Too Pure, the same label which had released some of the band's earliest material. It is mixed in dual mono, meaning that each instrumental or vocal part is hard-panned to appear in either the left or right channel only. This technique was also used on the preceding EP, Instant O in the Universe. As of June 2004, the album has sold over 40,000 copies in the United States. The group released 6 limited edition singles in 2005 and 2006, which were anthologized in the 2006 compilation Fab Four Suture, and contained material which Mark Jenkins thought continued the brisker sound of the band's post-Hansen work. By June 2007, Stereolab's lineup comprised of Tim Gain, Letitia Sadier, Andy Ramsey, Simon Johns, Dominic Jeffrey, Joseph Watson, and Joseph Walters. In 2008, the band issued their next album under the label 4AD entitled Chemical Chords, which downplays their arsenal of analog synths in favor of live instrumentation. The release was followed by an autumn tour in Europe, the United States, and Canada. In February 2009, they toured Australia as part of the St. Jerome's Laneway Festival. At times, Stereolab's music seems so unchanging that it feels more like it was generated by a laser-guided lounge pop meets krautrock machine than an actual group. But the small tweaks they make to their master plan on each album end up making a big impact. On Chemical Chords, they take a much more pop-focused approach than on their immediately previous work, which is saying something since neither Fab Four Suture nor Margarine Eclipse were among their more experimental moments in the first place. Actually, the shortness and directness of these songs could be seen as a bigger experiment for the band than their frequent lock grooves and hypnotic passages. With those trimmed, Chemical Chords presents a version of Stereolab's sound that is just as vivid as their earlier output, but fizzing with immediacy and urgency. Neon Beanbag jumps in hooks first, opening the album with surprisingly swift rhythm and Laetitia Sadier's more familiar bopping backing vocals. One Finger Symphony's animated brass, guitars, and percussion suggest gears rotating and levers lifting and falling in playful but somewhat sinister fashion. Daisy Click-Clack swishes in on brisk drums and a quaint melody that could be borrowed from a piano rag. Despite its name, Chemical Chords actually features some of Stereolab's most organic-sounding music in some time. The burbling synths on Self-Portrait with Electric Brain support the song's snazzy brass and strings rather than dominating them. Likewise, Stereolab's version of going pop means looking beyond what pop means in the moment. A strong 60s feel permeates much of the album, but the way the band reconfigures these sounds prevents it from sounding archaic. Three Women's solid rock bass and tambourine shout out to Motown's heyday, but its buzzing organs and bongos feel like they were channeled from a long-lost exotic novelty album. Cellulose Sunshine's gorgeous lysergic chamber pop could be a throwback if it weren't so modishly sleek, and Pop Molecule's massive synths and big backward drums offer a futuristic take on acid rock. The band also revisits its own pop heyday on Valley High and New You Demandons Pardons, boasting the clever counterpoint and fuzzy modes of the Mars Audiac Quintet era. Chemical Chords manages to be even more concisely charming than that album, sacrificing little of Stereolab's distinctive sound for its immediacy. In April 2009, Stereolab manager Martin Pike announced a pause in their activities for the time being. He said it was an opportune time for the members to move on to other projects. Not Music is the 10th and final studio album by Stereolab, released on November 10, 2010. The album is a collection of unreleased material which was recorded at the same time as Chemical Chords. The album also contained remixed versions of Silver Sands and Neon Beanbag, two songs that previously appeared on Chemical Chords. Not Music received generally positive reviews. On the review aggregate site Metacritic, the album has a score of 70 out of 100, indicating generally favorable reviews. Arnold Pan of Pop Matters gave the album a positive review, writing, "All in all, the catchiest tracks on Not Music make a good soundtrack for strolling down memory lane, with Stereolab offering fresh takes on old triumphs rather than just reliving them." Rebecca Raber of Pitchfork was also positive, writing, "I suspect it won't be long before we realize that the leftovers of a band like Stereolab are still better than the main dishes offered up by many of their peers." The AV Club's Christian Williams wrote that while the record felt padded near the end, for reheated leftovers, however, Not Music is delicious. In a more mixed review, John Falcone of Drowned in Sound wrote, "Stereolab will always provide excitement, but in the past, part of that excitement came from the band having no idea of how they should sound, so that the result threw polemics and tangents together with an unmatched grace. Now it feels as though they're comfortable in their skin. This is great for them, but for the listener it's a bittersweet comfort and feels akin to insincerely wishing well to an ex who has happily moved on." Under the Radar's Hayes Davis also gave the album a mixed review, writing, "Not Music is one of those albums of extras that disappointingly lays bare why these tracks were excluded from those that initially found a release. Despite its semi-archival status, the album sounds fresh and distinct from Chemical Chords. It shares the streamlined feel of that album, but many of these songs don't fit that album's distillation of lounge, Motown, and French pop elements. And those that do, such as the brisk, brassy Super Gianto and Everybody's Weird Except Me, sound like warped reflections of them. Instead, Not Music charts the more adventurous turns the band's sessions took, providing the more experimental yang to Chemical Chord's bubbly pop yin. Not Music is all over the place in the best possible way, and fans who love Stereolab's gracefully intellectual side will especially appreciate it. Taken with Chemical Chords, it is a testament to just how much ground the band could cover while remaining purely Stereolab. In 2013, Gain and Sadier, who both focused on Cavern of Antimatter and solo work respectively, performed at All Tomorrow's Parties festival held at Pontine and Canberra Sands. In 2018, Stereolab were announced as part of the lineup for 2019's Primavera Sound Festival, taking part on the weekend of May 30th in Barcelona, Spain. It will be the group's first live performance since 2009. After nearly 10 years of waiting patiently, I've heard that Stereolab are finally getting back together for a concert tour. I already have my tickets. I am hoping that this turns into something more long-term with new studio recordings to follow. I don't know many people who think that Stereolab are just okay. They either love them or hate them. Mostly I seem to know people who hate them. I am obviously on the other side, as I have been obsessed with them for years.
With the current material, it's the reviews are really good, and also sort of lots of references to people like Can and sort of Brian Wilson, a lot of experimental. Do you see yourselves as an experimental kind of musical outfit?
Well, we like to mess around.
Yeah, I mean, we do experiment, but it's not like, oh, we're going to try to do something that's never been done before. We just try things out.
I mean, we don't think we're
whatever comes out, really.
We don't think we're doing serious art or anything like that. We just like to explore sort of things and maybe, different things that we like, and we like to use in our music. I mean, the last LP, the Space Age Bachelor Pad music, was based on a certain form of music which existed like in the early 60s, and it was just trying to do something a bit different. Every track was made specifically for that record. It doesn't mean that the next one will sound like it.
Yeah, and also part of the flexibility of your musical lineup will also obviously change and affect what you compose and put out.
Yeah, I mean, on the last one we had Sean, who was to be in Michael Disney. He came down and helped us out, and he did, helped us with the arrangements, and he's very good. He's very musical, and it's very good to have someone like that around, to try and get your ideas actually in concrete.
But do you yourselves, are you more of a studio-based project, or is being out there on stage another area that is as experimental or as appealing to you? Where do you feel more comfortable? Do you think?
Well, we're quite split on that. I know that I prefer the live aspect of music, and Tim prefers being in the studio, even though Tim probably likes being live, and I like to be in the studio as well.
It's just I didn't think that would be very good live, but with live we just choose one style, one type of thing that we hope is quite exciting and live. We don't try to cover all bases or try to be very subtle or finicky. We just sort of go
concentrate on the one thing.
And it's good because some of the songs really turn out much differently and better, in fact, live when we sort of get to do them. Okay. But I like messing around in the studio, just seeing what you can come up with.
I'm sure there'll be some more messing around then on the way.
Yes.
Over to Stereolab. Thanks for coming into the studio to talk to us.
Well, thanks.
Thank you for listening to Eclectic Obsessions. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe on iTunes. Leave me a review. All 5-star reviews will be read on the show. You can follow the show on Facebook at Eclectic Obsessions, on Twitter at Eclectic Obsess 1, on Instagram at Eclectic Obsessions Podcast, and on YouTube at Eclectic Obsessions. I'd love to hear what you think. Feel free to email the show at ecobpod@gmail.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with a new Eclectic Obsession.